Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending on the portentous date of Friday, the 13th of March. It is the last episode of this podcast before St. Patrick's Day, so Sarah and I would like to take the opportunity to wish all of you listeners a happy St. Patrick's celebration. There's a lot to get through this week. We've got the continued energy crisis on foot of the war in the Gulf. I discovered to my horror this week that I have barely any oil left in my heating tank, so that's going to be very expensive. There is the Labour Party's reaction to that. There's Aintu's reaction to that. There's Richard Boyd Barrett suggesting that maybe we should nationalise all the petrol station forecourts. Then there was the case in Dublin of the gentleman who was arrested on suspicion. He's charged with serious assaults against a series of young children in the capital city. We obviously can't comment on that, but there are aspects of this case, including the fact that he was here illegally for 2 years and working as a delivery driver. Sarah and I might have something to say on that. There's also a major, those of you who were following the news last week will have seen that there was a major case in UCD of the alleged attack of a young medical student and all the furore around that. Two of our most popular articles this week were written by Laura Perrins and myself on that subject. We'll talk about that. And then there was the whole business of the St. Patrick's Day celebration in Shannon and indeed the Mother's Day celebration in Dublin Zoo, both of which stoked controversy. But first of all, Sarah, happy St. Patrick's Day. How are you?
That's a lot, John. I'm good, thanks.
I rang my fuel supplier this evening, Boyle, based in Limerick. Good guy on the phone. And I was like, look, I urgently need oil. I've got nothing left in my tank. And he was like, no, whatever you do. He actually said to me, if you can survive at all without buying oil, do it. Don't even think of buying oil. So he eventually settled on 200-litre delivery, which is coming to me on Saturday and is going to cost in the region of €400, which is astonishing. There was a report this week that Irish home heating oil prices have gone up by over 65% in the last 3 weeks, making us the most expensive in Europe. This fuel crisis shows no sign of abating, does it?
No, not really. So the €400, what would that have cost you before?
Half that, like just maybe a little bit over 200, I guess. So I think the price is now, I don't know. Like what I do in my house is I fill the tank in like August, and then usually comes this time of the year, if the winter is persisting, we'll need another top up. That's the position I'm now in. I should have checked it a couple of weeks ago and I didn't. I'm an idiot. And now it's going to cost me an astonishing sum of money just for a few litres of oil. But like it definitely would have been something like half that just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, because I don't use oil in my house, but I have a couple of people I know who do and who really struggle with it. One person in particular comes to mind who's kind of older. But I think it doesn't show any sign of abating. And also it's, as we said before, it's largely made up of government tax, basically. And we have an opposition who this week are coming out with just simply not serious suggestions as to how to fix this problem, because they're more interested in spending their time bleating about things that are happening in the world rather than things that are happening in Ballyhonus and the effect on people who live here rather than the effects on people who live in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, like, so for people who don't know, and I'm sure if you're watching this podcast, you probably do know, of the litre of diesel that you go and fill your tank with, almost 60% of that is tax. It's slightly less for gasoline or petrol or whatever you want to call it, unleaded. And it's slightly less again for home heating oil. But the huge proportion of the price of fuel in Ireland is tax. And as of yet, I mean, even Aintu, and I watched Pater Tabine on with Laura on her podcast earlier on the week. Pater is as impressive a communicator as ever.
Yeah.
And by no means are Aintu the only offenders in this. But the best you can say, like our politicians have been saying, is we're going to decide not to increase the tax further. So their position is they should cancel the planned carbon tax increase for later on this year. If the best you can say is we're not going to increase the taxes further, and there isn't a political party in the country willing to say, in the midst of this crisis, we should temporarily suspend 50% of fuel duties, which would actually bring the price of diesel and petrol down to below what it was before the crisis began. What is the point of the opposition? I mean, the government obviously, are reluctant for everything. What is the point of the opposition if they can't propose something like that?
Well, if they just toe the line on basically what the government are doing, bar one increase later in the year. I mean, I don't know, but it's the person who suffers. I mean, I think that the government and a lot of the opposition, not Pod or Toby in fairness, but a lot of them like Labour have kind of backed themselves into these moral corners where they can't come out and say what you're saying and cut the tax on it because that might be seen as anti-environmental, you know, bad for climate change. They can't decrease the taxes because they know very well themselves that their proposals and anything that they've suggested in terms of programs for government in the past would have never done anything of the sort and never will. So they sort of back themselves into these corners where they're forced to sort of be aligned with the government on most of the stuff because they have literally no idea and no plan and no big idea to do anything different.
Yeah, I wrote a piece at the start of the year where I said that basically I think over the next couple of years, and this is a bold statement, I think the whole climate change carbon tax fandango is going to become more of a politically salient issue than even immigration is. Because people don't know the carbon tax is slated to rise every year moving forward. I think the plan is by 2030 that there will be an additional €100 in tax per ton of carbon dioxide than there is right now, which will shove. I mean, these prices that you're looking at the pump at the moment, €2, €2.10 in some cases, these will become the norm if the government's planned tax rises continue. Further, they've obviously planned, we have figures this week, astonishing figures this week, Sarah, that showed that, in cases of houses that were retrofitted, the government is spending about €60,000 per house to retrofit it to make it more climate efficient, more energy efficient. The actual energy usage is not falling in the retrofitted houses. So we're spending massive big gobs of money to retrofit homes without any meaningful energy saving. Not only that, but the government is now planning regulations which say that, now this is a fair bit off, but they're saying that by 2050, if your house isn't above a C BER rating, you won't be actually able to sell it on the market. So the things that they are coming up with in terms of driving up the costs of consumption, driving up the costs of compliance with environmental laws, what they're doing right across all sectors of the economy. What we're seeing in this temporary energy crisis linked to this war, however long it lasts, and by the way, I'm starting to worry it'll last a while, these people are going to end up, pushing thousands of Irish families into fuel poverty. And the opposition has nothing to say about it beyond, as Labour said this week, we think it will be regressive to roll back any climate measures. I'll tell you what would be fucking regressive. It'd be fucking regressive to drive tens of thousands of families into poverty while the same family in Texas is not paying any kind of tax of this nature at all while producing a whole lot more emissions. No?
Yeah, well, but this is the age-old thing. I mean, I think that as the years have gone by and you're making the point of like plans for the future in terms of energy and how this will become a bigger political issue. But like as the years have gone by, if the ideas become more and more barmy and the effects to the normal little old granny living with her home heating oil in the middle of nowhere become bigger and bigger and bigger, it's sort of like the culture has become like what you're saying there, that Labour is saying like we couldn't possibly make any moves that would be regressive or anti-climate change. So we've gone so far down the climate change rabbit hole that even something logical like reducing the tax on things, even for an interim period while a war goes on, is considered to be absolutely not. So it's the culture in Irish politics, the long-term impact of the Greens in government has shifted the culture and the mindset so far into the trees, pardon the pun, that it's now even logical steps seem like too big.
It would be entirely within the power of government to, for example, to change the fuel taxes, to say that we're going to introduce a fuel price stabilizer, something that Brits thought about 20 years ago. So what they could do is they could say, and I'm not normally in favor of price fixing, but this in actual fact would be tax fixing. They could say, we are going to make, so that every family has certainty, we are going to say that the price of a litre of diesel at the pumps this year is going to be €1.70. And they would do that by simply amending the tax depending on what the price of oil was, up and down. So that if, for example, the price of oil was to drop significantly, well, the government will get a tax bonanza. And if the price of oil was increased consumers would get certainty at the pumps. That's something that they could do, for example. And they could say, look, we're going to increase that every year in line with inflation. That's something that they could do that would provide certainty in the market. Now, obviously, if there's a massive oil supply shock and the actual oil runs out, that's a different matter. Which
Yeah.
brings me to what the Labour Party proposed this week. Because what the Labour Party proposed was that their method for bringing down prices was just to dump the Irish Strategic Petroleum Reserve onto the market. Now, the Irish Strategic Petroleum Reserve, like it sounds like, is supposed to be, I'm not sure there is this much, it's supposed to be 90 days of supply of home heating oils, diesel, gasoline, fuels that can be that basically, if there's a situation where Iran sinks all the tankers in the Gulf and suddenly there's a massive shortage of supply, that the country can survive for 3 months. If it was ever used, presumably there will be rationing, there'll probably be brownouts, etc., etc. It is the reserve of last resort. And the Labour Party's proposal was, we'll just dump it onto the market to reduce prices. They would sooner do that than even consider cutting the taxes a little bit. Which, what happens? There's no guarantee this war wouldn't spill over into a massive oil supply shock crisis. I mean, one of the things I was reading during the week that terrified me was it's not even a matter, if, for example, Saudi Arabia is forced to shut down oil production because it's not safe to export the stuff because of the war. It's not a matter when you shut down those oil wells of just starting them back up again. The pressure in the wells may well drop to a point where you never get it back up to as high as it was. So you could permanently reduce the amount of oil coming out of the ground by shutting down those wells for a period of time. So, unless Trump wraps up this war fairly quickly, who knows what's ahead of us?
Mm. But that's the point that, just to go back to what you were saying about the Labour Party, that's the point I'm making, is that, dump the entire reserve onto the market and see what happens is in their mind more logical than doing something that might be seen as being anti the environment. And that's the cultural shift that happened in our political class, where that seems the thing that's much, much, much more mental seems like the more logical, reasoned approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think on all this, the other thing that strikes me in all this is like, what timing? I mean, I'm not going to tear into the government over going all over the world for St. Patrick's Day. That would be hypocritical. I think there's a logic to what they do in terms of promoting Irish business and overseas and all that sort of stuff. But the fact of the matter is the Dáil was shut down this past week. It's going to be shut down all of next week. This crisis is increasing and increasing and increasing. It may get worse before it gets better. And our politicians are, ironically, burning their own carbon allowances by flying all around the world. Like, I do think there's a case for, because the backbenchers aren't gone, right? There's a case for recalling the Dáil and letting them at least debate solutions on this stuff over the next week or so while our senior leaders are away. Because at the moment, it just feels like Irish families have been told to just suck it up. Bear in mind, I don't want to overstate this, but we've been in a cost of living crisis for some time, really since the beginning of COVID. People have been at the pin of their collar. For each of the last 5 years, I think the price of goods has outsped the increase in wages that people are getting. Like, people are getting worse off by the week, by the month, by the year. And our politicians, are very slow to react.
But is that not what you just said there, that phrase? Is that not is that phrase not the perfect phrase for the relationship between this country and the government for the last few years? Suck it up. Suck it up on immigration. Suck it up on a shitty healthcare service. Suck it up on still waiting for a children's hospital to be complete. Suck it up on the metro. Suck it up on your taxes. Suck it up.
Yeah.
Suck it up on paying for RTE to be bailed out because they spend too much money on flip-flops. Suck it up. Pay your TV license and suck it up. Like, is that not the culture? And to be not to be fair, but the reality of it as well is that we don't have a very good opposition. So suck it up and vote for the people you don't even like, because there's nobody better. Suck it up. Is that not just our whole culture?
Well, it's one of those ones I have felt for some time. I mean, I often talk on this podcast there about how the government has doubled public spending in 10 years. From 2015 to 2025, they've doubled public spending. I think that has masked a lot of public discontent. I think the fact that they have been able to throw enormous swaths of money at every problem while standing still in terms of their support is very telling. And if we do enter into, I mean, this is the kind of thing, what's happening in the Gulf at the moment And by the way, it'll be devastating to Donald Trump's legacy. Sorry for the TDS, folks, but it will be devastating to his legacy if this war in Iran unleashes a global oil shock and a global recession. And if that were to happen, the Irish government is in a very, very exposed position. A very exposed position. And by the way, I hope it doesn't happen. Genuinely hope it doesn't happen, because it could get very ugly. Like, I think if you're looking at what's happening in Iran at the moment, you're seeing that on Wednesday night of this week past, there was the images of an oil tanker in an Iraqi port that had been hit by Iranian ballistics of some kind. But I mean, it was somewhere where the Iranians, it wasn't in the Strait of Hormuz. It was a generalized attack. It was an attack on an oil depot in Oman as well. I mean, these small drones are getting through. They're causing chaos. The Americans don't seem to have anticipated this level of response. And I'd like to know what the plan is, because they've just announced the world's, speaking of the fuel reserves, the biggest single release of oil in history onto the market, and it barely moved the price. You can only do that once, maybe twice. So,
Well,
yeah. What's your take on the war before we move on, or how it's going?
I don't know how it's going. I mean, I'd prefer if it wasn't going at all. I don't think I have a take on it. I mean, people were upset last week because they felt that we were being a bit laissez-faire about war in general. That wasn't what I thought we were doing, but like, obviously nobody wants there to be a war. But I mean, I'm a podcaster as on this podcast with you on a podcast called The Week That Really Was, and my primary fixation is always on Irish people and the ground in Ireland, and like I said, the little old granny in Ballyhonus or whatever. So I hope Donald Trump wraps that war up as soon as possible, because I don't want people in Ireland suffering unnecessarily more when they have a very cowardly government and opposition who aren't going to come up with any ideas to make their lives easier.
But it's so frustrating, though, to watch the discourse in Ireland, because I look, I get it. If you oppose this war, I get it. I think it's poorly thought through. I think he hasn't thought through the consequences. I think it may well have been illegal under the US Constitution, let alone international law, what he's done here. But like, the amount of airtime taking up by Irish politicians lecturing Donald Trump, and to a lesser, well, actually greater extent, Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, kneecap on the news demanding that Micheál Martin go over and, I don't know, shake his fist in Donald Trump's face, compared to the amount of time that's taken up interviewing families who are struggling because they can't fill their car with diesel or they can't heat their homes.
But that's my point.
It's so frustrating.
I don't want to say, it's not that I don't care about international events. Of course I do. But I care the most about people who, as you quite rightly said, some of whom have been suffering a cost of living crisis since around the time of COVID, and certainly in at least 2 years anyway, who struggle to pay bills, whose discontent is masked, as you say, by the government's ability to throw money at things. But that's my concern. That's my primary concern. People have different things that they hate. I absolutely hate the idea of people, especially old people in Ireland, choosing between, heating or eating.
Yeah, well, that's where we're headed. It's going to happen soon. All right, let's move on. Do you want to know what my favorite newspaper headline of the week was?
Was it one you wrote yourself?
No. I'd never be so conceited as to say that. No, my favorite news headline of the week was from the Irish Independent. I'll read it verbatim. New immigration strategy, quote, must benefit Irish people, ministers told. With a big picture, your mate, Jim O'Callaghan. It's apparently his proposal. He's bringing forward the new immigration strategy, which must benefit Irish people. And like, if the new immigration strategy must benefit Irish people, what does that say about the old immigration strategy?
That it didn't.
Yes. Exactly. I thought it was an interesting admission by the government, or indeed the headline writers of the Irish Independent, one or the other. I thought it might be useful to look at immigration this week in the context of one case. Obviously, people will be...
Yeah. Just trying to rile me up.
Yeah.
Government policy brought to you by Captain Hindsight and Minister Johnny Come Lately. But okay.
Yes. Well, this week, a man in his 20s, originally from Brazil, who up until last week was working as a Deliveroo driver, was arrested and brought before the courts in Dublin on very grave and serious charges, which allege that he sexually assaulted an 8-year-old girl and also attempted to assault other girls of a similar age over a period of time. I want to say, just so anyone who's listening to this podcast knows, that Sarah and I, as we're in the media, and even if we weren't, it's just the responsible thing to do is to say, on those charges, that man is entitled to the presumption of innocence. He is entitled to a fair trial, and there is nothing more that we will say about those charges other than the fact that he is facing them. However, what we can talk about is the fact that he's been in the country for 2 years illegally, was working illegally, and found himself in a position where he could be accused of this terrible crime because of the fact that he was here illegally. There's legislation that says this isn't supposed to happen, Sarah. Why, in your view, is it still happening?
Because up until recently, the government policy or the structure that's in place to process people who are here and who have not been, legally entitled, who are not legally entitled to stay, the process by which those people are processed out of the country has been extremely lacking. I mean, in terms of percentages, negligible, really. I mean, you're talking about, at some years, tens of thousands of people who are not entitled legally to stay, but the numbers of people who are actually leaving or being deported was 80 one year or something ridiculous.
Well, look, it's one thing to be here illegally, but it's a whole lot easier to be here illegally when you're working. There is actually legislation on the books that says you're not allowed to do that. And so it is a fact of the matter. It's not an accusation. It's a statement of fact. If this man was working as a Deliveroo driver for a period of time while here illegally, then Deliveroo have serious questions to answer, because that is not supposed to be allowed to happen. The Workplace Relations Commission, under the 2024 Act, has the power to do spot checks and investigations of companies in relation to what's called visa compliance. Do people who are working for you have
And they
have
do.
the correct visas?
I witnessed them once.
Yeah, but they don't do very much of it. They don't do very much of it at all. And that, I think, is a major issue, because if you have somebody like this person is here and he's being employed, so he's taking a job that would otherwise go to somebody in the country who was not here illegally, so he's actually taking somebody else's job. He's earning money, which is sustaining a lifestyle here that he's not entitled to. And this has been permitted to happen. And, I was interested to note the absence of any kind of announcement from the cops this week that there was any kind of ongoing investigation into the circumstances of how he became to be a Deliveroo driver.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't speak too soon on that. That might very well arise. I mean, questions will probably be asked of Deliveroo. How do you employ somebody who doesn't have a work permit? Well, you're obviously ignoring, or you couldn't be in full compliance in your paperwork. Put it that way.
Well, if you try to sign up to be a Deliveroo driver, the reason I know this is that this week I did. Not because I need the money, thankfully, but because I wanted to have a look at this story. They do actually ask for proof that you're entitled to work in Ireland. You go onto their website and sign up to be I think they call them riders. Be a rider. You do have to provide proof. So, I mean, in fairness to Deliveroo, it is eminently possible that they did ask and were provided with documents that gave them satisfaction that this person had an entitlement to work here. And those documents may not have been authentic. We're speculating. We don't know. But the point is, it's still ultimately their responsibility. I mean, if there's a situation where somebody ends up working for them on, for argument's sake, false documents, they still must be liable for that, because clearly their checks are not rigorous enough. And I don't think I think the fine is something like €3,000, which for a company on that scale is not much of a deterrent. I think there needs to be real action in this area, because one of the things, I mean, the government talks about self-deportation, right? For years it's been on about, self-deportation. People will leave, people will go home voluntarily. And one of the reasons, if you talk to them, they think it works, is because they say, well, once you're deported, once you get a deportation order, you're not entitled to an income. You're not entitled to welfare. You're not entitled to child support, and we basically, you're not entitled to work. So we basically freeze you here with no money and no resources, and you leave on your own. free will. That's a theory.
Yeah.
But that all falls apart if people are here illegally and working.
But you also can't expect that the job market is the thing that's going to weed out people who are staying here illegally. I mean, there's 150 different reasons why somebody wouldn't self-deport that aren't financial. Maybe maybe they have income from somewhere else. Maybe they get into criminality. Maybe they're married to a man and they don't have to, like, do you know what I mean? It's an absurd, kind of silly, really short-term vision for how to effectively manage an asylum process, which is that you hope that the jobs market will just flush them out.
Yeah, well, our colleague Cormac Lucy, who Cormac Lucy, I never expected him to be as hardline on immigration as he is.
Mm.
Because he's a liberal, and I don't mean that, I don't use that in an insulting way. He's an old school kind of liberal with a big L.
Yeah.
And he's like, just, what we should do is we should reopen Spike Island, or we should reopen Ireland's Eye. I don't know if it's reopening Ireland's Eye, but we should take one of those islands off the coast and just round up all the people who don't have the right to be here legally and put them on the island with like bread and water and minimum standards of accommodation, and wait till they apply to leave. And we should make it as public and unpleasant as possible, so that the European Court of Human Rights is up in arms and the word goes out around the world that the last place you want to be as an illegal migrant is Ireland. That's what he wants to do. And I have to say, every time I read one of these stories, I'm moving more and more in that direction.
That's some Lord of the Flies style politics, but I don't even think that that's necessary. An asylum process that works, that actually has accountability, that actually, if you go through the process in such a with such speed that your entire circumstances haven't revolutionized themselves in the period. In other words, that you haven't presented on day one as an applicant who's a single person, and by the end, by your appeal, you've got 6 kids or whatever. So a process that's effective, that's speedy, and that actually accounts for itself, accounts for the person, and sees the process through to the end would work too. We just don't have that. There's no need for islands. We just need to if people are being deported, you deport them. And that's unfortunate, but it's just the reality.
But it's your lot. It's your lot down there in those forecourts, isn't it? Because, by the time you put a deportation order on somebody, then they have the right to appeal. Then they have another right to appeal. I mean, it's the whole thing with the speed of the legal process can take months and months and months. And by the way, this chap, according to the information I have, was not an asylum seeker. He rocked up here, didn't he, from the United Kingdom, crossed the border, maybe at Newry, maybe he flew in on a plane, arrived, didn't apply for a visa, availed of freedom of movement as exists between our two islands, and somehow ended up with a job, and now finds himself accused of these terrible crimes. So he wasn't even an asylum seeker. He was just somebody who just basically rocked up here without any of the appropriate papers and was somehow able to get a job. I think there are questions to ask, aren't there?
Well, there is questions to ask, but I mean, it's much more difficult. There's different categories of people who are here illegally. Some who have gone through a process that's delayed and delayed and delayed and takes too long, and then they are asked to self-deport. Others who are here, it's much more difficult to keep track of somebody who's arrived, come across the border from, maybe, let's just suppose, from Belfast into Ireland, and is now working with some fake document. It's very difficult, much more difficult to keep tabs on those kind of people. I'm not saying it's done, but if we're not even able to process somebody from their rejected asylum application in the International Protection Office to Dublin Airport onto a flight, if we're not even able to do a 30-minute car journey right, how are we ever going to manage people who are a bit more tricky to keep hold of?
Yeah, and the other thing is, I do think it is time to crack down on this in a much harder way. Like I say, I'm moving in the direction of Cormac Lucy. If the Gardaí detect somebody in the course of their everyday work who is not here and has no right to be here, then why is that person not being detained? You have no right to be in the country. You have no right to freely move about within the country. Why is that person not being detained? Okay, maybe we won't go as far as Cormac's Island, but, I mean, it's not as if this is impossible to do. Do you remember during COVID, at the start of COVID, where there was talk of setting up special camps around the place? Do you remember that? They were going to open up a massive, have you forgot?
But COVID was how the government showed us that when there's a rocket up their arse, they're able to actually do things.
Yeah.
It lifted the air of mystique. I had spent whatever age I was when COVID happened, 38, 37. I had spent my 37 years believing that the state and all of its functions was this giant lumbering ship that went really slowly, and that any change you needed to slowly turn the ship or whatever. Then COVID, it was like, don't leave your house, you're arrested, you're not allowed to drive, checkpoints here, checkpoints there, checkpoints the other. You're only allowed to have a drink if you buy cocktail sausages. Well, sure, that was all brought in like that.
Yeah.
Turns out it's a speedboat when it suits them.
Yep. So, I mean, the urgency, it can be dealt with, because like, this is unsustainable. You can't have a country where people just wander in off a boat with no legal right to be here, or a plane or a car. By the way, forgive me, I've been under the weather with some monstrous dose all week. So if I'm coughing and spluttering through the podcast, I apologize to the listeners. But
Man,
you can't just have a situation in a country where people just rock in from nowhere, end up with a job, and exist here for 2 years without detection until they somehow come to light in terms of an investigation into a very serious crime. That's a joke country.
But it's worse.
It's our country.
But it's worse than that, because even if the person is found guilty of those crimes, he still won't be deported.
Well, they'll want him to serve his prison sentence here, I guess.
He won't be deported when he gets out, John.
Well, I won't comment on the trial, but yeah, I would.
I'm talking about, forget this person. I'm talking about in general.
Mm-hmm.
We are very, very slow to deport people.
Yes.
So even if he served a person, one serves a time in prison for a crime like this, and they're illegal, I don't see a lot of evidence that those people are immediately deported on finishing their sentence.
All right. Okay. Look, we'll leave it there on that immigration issue. If there's more that you wanted us to talk about, let us know in the comments, which we do read every week, even though sometimes they give us heartburn, but we do read them. So let us know if there's more in the comments. Let's talk a little bit about, because we were going to talk about it a little bit last week actually, and didn't get to it because your internet died a death, unfortunately, and I had to finish the podcast on my own. I think I did an admirable job, if I say so myself. But this case in UCD, have you been following it?
Yes, hard to miss.
It's been extraordinary. So for those of you who are listening to this who haven't been following it, basically a couple of weeks ago, Ruth Coppinger, TD, stood up in the Dáil and she made a very serious accusation. She said that University College Dublin had encountered a young female medical student who had been grievously raped right before she was due to do her exams. And on foot of that, she'd had to have an abortion. And the abortion overlapped with the exams. So she was not able to sit the exams because she was having the abortion and suffering from the aftermath of the abortion. She said that UCD refused to accommodate her in any way, shape or form. She took UCD to court. UCD somehow prevailed in the court case. And after all of that trauma, UCD were found to be entitled to their costs. So now we had this rape victim in UCD, anonymized, who was facing not being able to become a doctor like she wanted, and was going to be charged €200,000. And also, by the way, the university wasn't properly investigating the fact that images of her in a state of undress and in a very degrading way were being circulated around the university. And there was outrage, wasn't there?
Absolutely.
As there should have been.
But then you wrote a piece.
Well, actually, Laura Perrins wrote the first piece, because I wrote this in my email to the readers on Friday last, I think Friday the 6th of March. I basically wrote a sort of generic thing, sort of slightly defending UCD on it. But then in the interim, the court case came to light, the court case that was before Miss Justice Marguerite Bulger earlier on this year. And Laura initially did a summary of it. And then I did a little bit of a deeper dive. I mean, to say that it is a disgrace that this story reached the Irish media in the format that it did, Sarah, is a complete understatement. So the first thing to note about this student, and I want to stress, I'm not attacking the student here, but these are the facts. So in 2022, she started her medical degree. And in that first year, she missed substantial time due to personal issues. She also failed a number of exams and had to repeat them at the end of that year. And she moves into her second year, which is the 2022. Sorry, the first year was 21-22 term. Second year is the 22-23 term. First term, she misses almost 50% of classes. She rises the Christmas exams and she fails 3 exams, 50% of her exams. She's told she'll have to remediate these grades. There was also a series of meetings with her which she was basically told, look, your performance academically is not up to scratch. You may want to consider, whether this is the degree for you. May 2023, she goes to do her final exams for that year. There are 8 of them in total. She did, to her credit, pass 2 of those exams, but 6 of them she did not sit or failed. And after she had not sat those exams, this and only then is when she says to the university, I actually had a serious medical issue happen to me. And they said, can we have a letter from your doctor? And they got a letter from the doctor, which was very vague. And they said, this isn't enough. We need more. And the doctor then sent in a letter basically saying she's been the subject of a sexual assault and she's had to have a termination of pregnancy. And the university at this stage says, okay, we will work with you on these February exams. These May exams, and we'll work to give you a way to remediate some of them that were affected by that. But the other ones, the outstanding ones that you've already failed, you'll have to take those exams yourself. And she says, no, absolutely not. I've been raped. I deserve special grades because of the circumstances I've had. And this goes on and on and on. There's a standoff. She never takes the exams. And then she finally agrees to take the exams between the 3rd and 17th of May, 2025. So last year, she was supposed to take those exams. That was agreed on April the 9th. On April the 21st, 2 weeks later, is when the image of this person is sent to various staff in UCD. And she then says, well, I'm not taking those exams now. This image has been sent around. And in all of this, the judge has been listening to the judgment, listening to the case, and she delivers the judgment in January of this year, which is absolutely scathing. And basically says she doesn't understand why the student didn't take the exams. She doesn't understand why the university is being criticised. It's done everything it can for her. And that's the story. I mean, obviously there is trauma in there. No one disputes that images of this person were sent around. But the media has run with this as if it was some kind of, extraordinary open and shut case and entirely misrepresented it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I have members of my family who are doctors, and they're hard exams, but they're hard, reassuringly hard. I mean, you can't be a doctor if you didn't pass the exams. Like, you can't get a pass on exams where people's health and lives will hang in the balance on your instructions or non-instructions or advices or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like the university has to uphold the integrity of the medical degree. So that'd be the first thing. Second thing is, like, it's obviously extremely traumatic and horrific for the lady involved, but there is, the judgment also points out there is a lot of evidence of non-attendance and, not, as you say, non-attendance at lecture and failure exams before this event even happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you're really seeing is another example of, because it's really hard to talk about specific cases because you never know the full facts of, et cetera, et cetera. But what you are seeing is another example of people like Ruth Coppinger who will kind of take elements of a story that suit their particular agenda or their particular narrative and run with it. And then our media should know better and should be more rigorous in their analysis of these kind of stories, but they're not. So they literally ran with the truth according to Ruth Coppinger.
Yeah, they did. And the whole thing to me has echoes, not perfect analogy by any means, manner or form, but there's echoes of what happened to the Cardinal schoolgirls all those years ago.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't happen to the Cardinal schoolgirls, it happened to their teachers, where one Facebook post alleged that somebody somewhere had said that young girls wearing leggings were distracting the male teachers. And all of a sudden this became a 3-week freak out on the media. It turned out that nobody had ever said those words or anything like them. And it was just an absolute witch hunt. In this case, by the way, you've expressed sympathy for the student. I obviously express sympathy for anyone who's been the victim of a sexual assault. But I also think, and it's like we don't talk about this stuff, right? Because it is true that a woman may have very good reasons, Sarah, for not reporting a rape. So I'm not going to criticize that. But then don't those reasons kind of go away with a couple of circumstances? First of all, you have just been in the media for 2 weeks talking about this thing that happened to you, how traumatic it was, how massive impact it had on your life. That's the first thing. Secondly, the student concerned was in the year below, apparently. This is the reason she didn't want to repeat a year, allegedly, was that the attacker was in the year below. So I don't know people in UCD medicine, but I imagine there are lots of people in UCD medicine who know that year group, and they're looking around at the 20 or 30 or so men in it, and they're saying, well, one of you must be a monster. And of course, if, all these crimes are alleged, but we'll take the victim's word at it, and taking what she said as being the truth, that means there's a medical student out there who is an utter monster, who violently raped her, and then 2 years after he had violently raped her and gotten away with it, then decided to send photographs around of the rape just when she's about to sit her exams. And she has not reported this to the Gardaí or gotten them involved. And that is a person who, if he graduates as a medical student, is going to, as you know, have access to vulnerable people for the rest of his career, including potentially vulnerable women. Like, isn't there a case for fairly criticizing somebody who's making all of these massive accusations for not going to the cops?
Yeah. It is the thing you don't talk about. I mean, you get nervous even talking about it. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's a hard subject, but on the balance of everything, like I think, like you say, it's very hard to criticize somebody and you don't know their own particular story. But I would encourage anybody that I knew who was in that circumstance or in that situation, who had been raped by somebody, and as you say, a monster, I would be encouraging them to go to the Gardaí, because that person now roams around to do it to somebody else, has gotten away with it, and is potentially, as you say, going to be a doctor and with access to vulnerable women.
Well, I mention it because I said I sent out my email to the subscribers, not readers, subscribers, on Friday the 6th of March. It was on the topic of this, and what I said was fairly mild, and I got a very strong response back to it. And the response, Sarah, was almost perfectly gendered. Male readers, almost, but not almost. I mean, to a man, literally said, well said, John. It's important that this perspective is considered, etc., etc. And the female readers, not exclusively, but a majority of them, were quite angry with me. And they all said, what about the rapist? Why hasn't he been kicked out of UCD? Why is he still there? He's a threat to other women. That was their concern. And I mean, there were so many of them that I couldn't email them all back individually. But I did want to say to them, he's still there because no person has been accused in this case. No one has ever gone even to UCD and said it was Joe Bloggs. If there's a Joe Bloggs in actual UCD medicine, it's
You
not him.
can't. That's what the law is for. You can't kick people out of medical school because there has to be due process. Like,
Yeah.
because you don't like it, you can't do that.
But these people had all read the media coverage, and they'd all come to the conclusion that basically this person had gotten away with it. That, like, the UCD and the authorities had let a very serious crime happen and ignored it. And the media are responsible for that. The media coverage is responsible for that.
Yeah.
In fairness to the student at the centre of the story, she's not responsible for it, but the media are responsible for it. Again. And it was like another similar story this week was, did you see what happened to Brendan Courtney, the TV presenter?
Only got beaten up.
Yes, and a man was charged with that was convicted of assaulting him this week. Now, Brendan Courtney, just to be absolutely clear for the defamation lawyers out there, and genuinely, I'm not saying anything wrong bad about Brendan Courtney here. He was the victim of an assault.
Yeah, no, he did nothing. He just walking down the street.
There was some chat that he might in the case that he might have banged on a car windscreen or something like that, and people overreacted. But the point is that a year ago, when this assault happened, he said in the aftermath of it happening that he thought there was a chance it might have been a homophobic attack. And all the media ran with this, right? Brendan Courtney, victim of homophobic attack. He's basically been gay bashed on the streets of Dublin. The case came up this week. The guy who pleaded guilty has 2 gay sisters himself. He said he had no idea who Brendan Courtney was. It was many things, but it certainly wasn't a homophobic attack. And obviously he's motivated to say that, but there was no real pushback on that. It was just a regular old violent assault. Where are the media headlines saying, actually, we were wrong about that homophobic attack story we ran last year? There's no correction of it.
And also, like, just for stopping the stoking up of fear of young gay people that they're going to get their head kicked in on a night out for no reason.
All right. Well, speaking of, actually, I was going to say speaking of young gay people, but neither of these stories relate to gay people necessarily. But we have 15 minutes left on the podcast, so let's spend them talking about 2 of the things that drove people absolutely demented online this week. There were 2 of them, because obviously this weekend is an uncommon weekend in that Sunday is Mother's Day and Tuesday is St. Patrick's Day. Let's start with Mother's Day because it comes first. There's a protest this Sunday on Mother's Day outside Dublin Zoo because of a marketing piece of material that Dublin Zoo put out for Mother's Day that involved a drag queen, i.e. a male person, not a transgender person, a drag queen, a male person in a wig depicted as a woman. And some people have gotten very, very upset about this. Are you one of them?
Yes and no. This particular person has a few characters, one of whom, funnily enough, is Malahide Mammy. And that's who he is dressed up as doing that promo for the zoo. I think it's to be taken in context. I don't think that. I think that what's happened there is that has happened against a backdrop where women feel marginalized, sidelined by men, for a long time now. And so men who dress up as women feel like they have more rights in Ireland than women. And men who dress up as women are allowed into women's prisons, and men who dress up as women are allowed into women's sports, and men who dress up as women are allowed into women's domestic violence shelters, and men who dress up as women are allowed into elderly women's somebody was talking to me about it at the weekend, special respite for disabled elderly women, and men who decide that they're disabled, who self-ID as disabled and female, can enter into those spaces too. So I think that there's a rising rage amongst a lot of women in Ireland about how the government basically snuck in a self-ID law in 2015 that allowed men who call themselves Mary to suddenly be Mary. And with that as the backdrop, I think this was just a bridge too far. We had a referendum to try and remove the word mother from the Constitution. There's just been assault after assault after assault, and reducing womanhood down to some lipstick and some fake tits is just getting a bit tedious, I think, for Manon Heron, frankly.
Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling. I'm losing my voice a little bit here, but I'm sorry. I looked at it and it didn't bother me very much. I mean, I remember growing up, one of the great comedy characters, particularly if you lived near enough to Northern Ireland to get Northern Irish television, was like May McFetridge, who was a drag queen performer. It was Danny LaRue in Britain. That was there's a tradition of drag comedy. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like it. It's been going on for years and years and years. And I think it's wrong to wrap that up entirely in the transgender debate, which is something different entirely.
But it's the culture that's emerging that basically diminishes women and diminishes the motherhood and everything down to be this insignificant thing. Like, have your drag queen for your summer fair, have your drag queen for your zebra month, have your drag queen to promote the new elephants in the zoo, whatever. I don't care. Mother's Day, though, just a bit too far, just a step too far. It's just really kind of, so what, Mother's Day, it's all a bit of crack. It struck a chord with people.
If for argument's sake, she was still alive, and she's not, she's gone to the great,
disco ball
boudoir in the sky.
Yeah.
If, for example, she was still alive and Dublin Zoo had done a promo for Mother's Day involving Dame Edna Everage, probably the world's most famous drag queen until the performer, I think Barry, can't remember his second name, I should, died last year. Internationally recognised, comic character for years and years and years, not a transgender person. Would there be half the amount of outrage as there is here?
Yeah, I think there would.
You think there would be?
Yeah,
I
I
don't.
think I do. For if it was for Mother's Day, yeah, I do. Because I think that the Irish mother took a had a massive win, but the referendum was an example of a government that it has, frankly, no respect for women or mothers. In that, as I said, trying to remove the word from the constitution, self ID laws for men to be women, Barbie Kardashian in women's prisons, etc., etc., etc. So on that backdrop, I think that this just hit a nerve. So if it was Dame Edna or if it was this comedian and it was 15 years ago, I don't think people would have cared as much. But it's just now we've had enough.
All right. Okay. I'll defer to you on that. For the record, that one didn't bother me. What did bother me more was the other great internet outrage rage of the week, which was the Shannon St. Patrick's Day parade thing. Now, people may not have seen this. If you go onto any social media account and type in Shannon St. Patrick's Day, you'll find what we're talking about. It's a poster, basically, that the fine people down in Shannon town, which is not that far from me and is a great town, put out for St. Patrick's Day, which is basically depicted young girls in various cultural dress of various countries. They had the flags of, I think, the Philippines, Latvia was one, Brazil, weirdly, the United Arab Emirates, Syria, Ukraine, other countries, and basically said, this St. Patrick's Day, bring out all your cultures. Let's have a big celebration of everyone's culture here in Shannon. And of course, people were very, very angry about that because they thought St. Patrick's Day isn't for, with the best will in the world, United Arab Emirati culture. It's for Irish culture. Did you follow that story? Did you have an opinion on it?
Yeah, I think I imagine we have the same opinion. I mean, you hear there's always this, I'm often struck by how much virtue signaling goes on amongst our political class about wishing people Eid Mubarak and, Ramadan and, all these other cultural holidays, we'll say, that occur for people who live in Ireland. And they're all falling over each other to wish. Why can we not just have ours?
You never see them. You never see them wishing Happy George's Day, St. George's Day to all our English residents. Those are the largest minority in the country. That is one thing.
Different.
But yes,
you and your Margaret Thatcher, just park that for a minute. But there's never posters of Ramadan with St. Patrick fasting. You know what I mean? Like we live in Ireland. St. Patrick's Day is part of our culture. He's our patron saint. Why does that have to be diluted with other things? Why can't that not? And surely my understanding of it was, certainly in America, they love St. Patrick's Day. There was a real novelty to come to Ireland and see and be in Ireland for St. Patrick's Day. People from outside of Ireland, surely, who come into Ireland have some level of interest or curiosity about our culture and want to see it. Not to see a variation of it that's diluted with all the other cultures, but actually see Irish culture and an Irish holiday. But apparently not. I mean, apparently, see, this is the thing. It's kind of like, everything that's Irish is offensive.
I don't think it was intended that way. And I agree with you that it came across that way. But I think it's really funny because if you go to the St. Patrick's Day parade in Chicago or the St. Patrick's Day parade in New York or the St. Patrick's Day parade in back end of nowhere, Kansas, you'll see the same stuff. You'll see the leprechauns. You'll see the Guinness. You'll see the Aran sweaters. You'll see the kind of Irishness that you find in postcards in Connemara shops. Irish traffic jam with a load of sheep, that sort of stuff. That's very much the depiction of Irishness you'll get there. If you go to London, I was actually in London for St. Patrick's Day last year, entirely accidentally, and the person I was with and I accidentally walked into Trafalgar Square, and it was just like it was mad. It was green everywhere, and it was very, very Irish. And yet at home, there's this instinct that we don't celebrate Irishness in that kind of way, that we more celebrate the country, and that means celebrating the diversity within the country. Like we said, like St. Patrick's Day in Ireland is about celebrating Ireland rather than Irishness. Do you not think that's, am I onto something there, or am I daydreaming? Because I always look at
No,
the,
I don't. I don't think that you're wrong, and then that has become the way that the powers that be, government, media, whatever, would like it to be. But I don't think that that was done in consultation with the public. And
uh,
I also think that that's done not in a way in which they think that this would be better, but in a way that which that again, more virtue signaling. God forbid we would have a day that was Irish and Irish culture. So we'll just dilute it and we'll pretend that it's actually more about Ireland today than anything else, which is just nonsense. It's like the way people pretend that Christmas is one thing and not the birth of Christ, you know?
yeah. I will say I would like for St. Patrick's Day to be much more about Irish culture, not in a snobby way, but genuinely in the kind of the stuff about Irish culture that can make kids go, wow. Not shamrocks and Guinness and, I don't know what else on top of shamrocks and Guinness. But give me a bit of Cuchulainn. Give me a bit of Queen Maeve, Give me a bit of that kind of like magnificent history. Ben Scallon, who Ben's a great enthusiast for all that sort of stuff, and he sometimes drives me a bit potty, but he makes a very good point. Like we've got this Irish film and television industry, and you've got all these other countries that export their culture around the world, export their history and stories, like the great TV show Vikings, which is based on Ragnar Lodbrok, who may or may not have been a historical character. Massive international show. But where is the ambition in the Irish? We hold this Ministry for Culture. Where is the ambition to do like an epic TV series on the Tyne? Your Queen Maeve, your Cuchulainn, your Ferdia, your Red Branch Knights.
Yeah.
Like, that's a Game of Thrones scale story right there, ready to be made. But like we just don't have the ambition to do it or export it. You look at what the Scandinavians are doing with their arts, out the Irish are doing with our arts. I mean, we're giving free money to lads to do God knows what. Were you laughing?
Just recalling some of what those God knows whats actually were.
Are you recalling the one I tweeted last week of the cabaret act? Yeah, that was not great. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go and scroll back through my tweets to find it. There's a lot of money being spent in Ireland on a lot of shit art, and there's massive, there's incredible stories there waiting to be told. There's the Fianna, there's Finn McCool, there's the Children of Lear. Children of Lear probably be better as a kid's story, I guess, right? But it's there to be made.
But we also have spent, the last year at least balragging our flag, saying that our flag was somehow far right if it was put up. There's lots of Irish cultural things that should and could and should be celebrated beyond anything that currently is, as you say. And just for one day, I don't think that needs to include other cultures.
No, it doesn't. And I don't think other cultures would be offended by that.
No, I don't think so either.
I mean,
well, as you say in the podcast, we've said it loads of times, I spend lots of time in Greece and have my whole life. Greece has the most incredible sort of religious festivals where they kill goats and pigs and march them through the town and, with fires and whatever, and amazing festivals and different things. I love all that when I'm in Greece. I don't want to go to Greece and then go, we're going to dilute this down now because we're afraid that the paddies are going to get upset that there's no Guinness. So we'll just have a small amount of raki there on the side, but we'll put Guinness here to make everybody feel comfortable. I don't need to feel comfortable.
Yeah,
I'm in
it's like going to Oktoberfest in Munich and being annoyed that they don't have Smithwick's.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone. I mean, this thing. The other thing is my last thought on this is that there's a reason to celebrate your own culture, which is that you can't appreciate other cultures without understanding your own.
Yeah, of course.
Like, there's no point understanding or being enthralled by the mythology of ancient Greece if you don't understand the mythology of Ireland. So there's no point. You need something to anchor yourself in, like, what's this part of the world I'm from? Anyway, look, we could talk about it all evening. But anyway, I think we'll leave it there because we're about to touch the hour mark, and it has been, I think, quite an engaging hour. Do you have any last thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Just be as Irish as you can be on St. Patrick's Day, and don't be ashamed of it. Fly your flag, and just don't let them tell you what to do or who to be. Sick of it.
Okie doke. I don't have a flag, so I won't be flying one, and I won't be watching the RTÉ coverage of the St. Patrick's Day parade from Dublin either. So I don't know what I'll do. Maybe I'll watch some of Sheamus's greatest WWE matches, Ireland's proudest export. You've no idea who I'm talking about, do you?
No.
And that, folks, is the difference between men and women. I've been John, she's been Sarah, that's been the week that really was, and we will see you in 1 week's time. Happy St. Patrick's Day.